Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Into the Hemaverse, your podcast for everything going on in the Hemaverse. I am, as always, Colin Vredenberg, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Nathan Graperes in the top,
Hey,
and David Rao in the bottom.
Hey,
Guys, how's it going?
about the same.
Yeah, we took a nice little week off. Things got kind of hectic with some scheduling, and so we ended up taking a week off. But we're back now. I don't know what we're gonna do next week. I'm supposed to be at the beach, guys.
you could do a podcast from the beach.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, it would be like the audio would be awful. That's the only
But the
thing.
video would be hard to beach.
I'm not cutting that. That was a good one, actually. I'm pretty impressed with that.
You're welcome.
So have we been working on anything lately? Any new HEMA stuff?
One of my guys just posted, Julius, he just posted on Facebook that he got his copy of the Talhoffer Facsimile from
Oh.
Michael Chittister, and I have to go buy one now.
Oh, did you get to look at it?
I just saw like the picture of the spine of the book, and I was like, oh my God, yes, please now.
Yeah, I keep meaning to get one of those. I keep forgetting.
Is it like, where do you find them? I don't even know.
It was an Indiegogo
The
campaign
dark
that
web.
what's that? The dark. It was an Indiegogo campaign that that Michael Chittister ran, I think, last year or earlier this year or something, and it's got, I guess, finally ready or finally got made in the mail or something. But you can, I'll send you a link. I'll send you a link to it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
please do.
I contributed to the campaign, and then I forgot to buy the facsimile.
Oh no.
Here's a picture. Here's a picture that he posted. If you can see that, I don't know if you can or not.
Just send it to me later,
Oh,
and
it
what
looks
I'll
really
do
nice.
is I'll do like I did in the last video where you show a picture and then it like blows up so that like it's actually like a good.
Yeah,
Really?
like it's like leather bound with like a stamp on the leather on the front of it. Looks absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so link me that, and then I'll put the link in the description in case anybody else wants to throw that out there. And
Absolutely.
that's a fantastic segue into our news. So our news this week is kind of just updates on what's already been going on. There's definitely the Give a Girl a Sword event that is still going on. That's being done by Esfinges. You can find them. Most everything is on Facebook. I'm not sure if the website is updated for the event, but on the Facebook there are several different events, I would say, but they're all online, obviously. But they're great. There's one for Introduction to Longsword, which I think Mike and Rolfsema is teaching, which should be pretty good.
Yeah, she did that one last weekend, I think.
Oh, okay. And then there's the Ringin one, I think is this weekend, right?
There's a ringing one, I think. There's like a footwork one, and there's a sword and buckler one, I believe. I
Cool.
think maybe a rapier one as well.
Cool. So all that information we will link in the description, but it's Esfinges on Facebook, or I think it's esfinges.com.
.net, I think.
.net. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was .net or .com, but cool. Next up on the list is the Destreza lecture series by Sacramento Sword School. Puck Curtis, I think, did his lecture himself this week, but I'm not sure if they're going to continue after that. The lecture as a whole, if you're interested in a different kind of rapier swordplay, I actually had a little bit of a conversation with somebody on Facebook about Destreza specifically, because they were saying, man, I don't want to do rapier anymore because it kills my knees. And I was like, you know what I did when I had a trick knee and it still worked? Destreza. It's everything's straight leg. You really don't bend that knee at all. So if you're interested, I will put a link in the description. There's a big long YouTube series with a bunch of great lectures by a bunch of Destreza, I would say, practitioners, like teachers, researchers, translators. Lois Spangler did one. So really cool series.
I have to just butt in. I forget who it is now, but there's a rapier master from the,
Mhm.
I think, middle 17th. It's 17th century, I believe. Who talks about Fabris, and he talks about Fabris's proceeding with resolution, which
Mhm.
is basically just walking forward towards your opponent. And he says it's fine, but it's it's mainly for old people who can't who can't get low and can't do proper footwork.
Well, that's so weird though, because Fabris is the one that's like, you need to be.
Yeah, but he's just saying that basically if you can't do good footwork, he's basically just walk towards your opponent.
I mean, that's an interesting point too, because it's like, well, you're old, you just roll the dice at that point. You're either gonna get them or they're gonna get you. Where was I? Oh man, Swords Without Borders ends this week. It is a fundraiser, a fundraiser raffle, I would say, put on by Bill Grandy of Virginia Academy of Fencing. It is to benefit Doctors Without Borders, which could definitely use the help. So far, they've raised, I think they're close to or at their $2,000 goal. Last time I checked, I'll put it up on screen so everybody can see it. But it's a great raffle. So you buy in, you pay for tickets, you hope that you're lucky, and on July 31st, when it ends, I think 14 people will be lucky winners of some amazing prizes, including a Jesse Belsky side sword, which I can't more highly recommend. That's what I use. It's what I will always use, and I will never use anything else. There's a halberd, I think. There's a bunch of really cool books from Freelance Academy Press. You should definitely check it out if you haven't already. Hopefully, you already did. Yes. Oh, and I did mention that ends July 31st. That's when it's done. So please, if you're going to donate, do it this week.
Do you
Or if
know
you're
how
going
many entries have already been made?
Well, I think their goal is 2,000 and it's like $10 an entry, so that's you're getting close to 200 entries.
That's pretty good odds. 14 out of 200.
Yeah, 14 out of 200 is not bad, honestly. I haven't put in mine yet. I was supposed to make a video too, and it didn't. Spend quite a couple of weeks. All right, so let's talk about our guest. So our guest this week is Jessica Finley. She's here to talk to us about, and this is a mind blower for me because this is new research that she's been doing, but it is basically Lichtenauer and hunting terminology, and how the two, how we can come to a better understanding of it through understanding this. Would you call it colloquialisms or vernacular? It's very. How would you describe that, David? You know way more about this than I do.
It's more like the terminology that Lichtenauer uses tracks and seems to have a very close affinity with the language that was used in medieval German hunting sources.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like, and it kind of makes sense if we consider this to be kind of a knightly aristocratic kind of art, which it presents itself as,
Mm-hmm.
that it's related to hunting, because hunting was one of the ways that you trained for combat, right?
Yeah,
killing boars and things like that.
It's interesting because I didn't actually know that they hunted boars with swords. I thought it was like crossbows and bows, and you don't hunt with swords. That's a silly thing to use, right? But I don't know why it never dawned on me that yeah, of course they did. Like, why wouldn't you? It's an interesting. Anyway, Jess is in the waiting room now, so let's bring her in and talk about Lichtenauer and hunting terminology. All right, so today we have Jessica Finley. She's the author of Medieval Wrestling, Modern Practice in the 15th Century Art, published in 2014 by Freelance Academy Press. She founded a school near her home in North Georgia called, forgive me, it's Ritterkunstfetischule, and continues to publish under her blog of the same name. You may know her best from the Spess Light jacket that bears her name. I'm personally a big fan. I have 2 of them. She is also renowned for her work in textiles and fabric, both in the medieval and modern. Jess, welcome to the program, and thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, y'all.
Yeah, you were one of the people that I said that I think in the first episode that I wanted to have on, specifically because of your work in textiles. I am a big clothing history fashion nerd.
Awesome.
Please don't let me devolve the conversation into that, because I will try.
I wouldn't complain, but probably like the audience isn't exactly that.
That's true. So what we are here to talk about is this really cool, I guess it's research that you're doing, right? Lichtenauer and hunting terminology.
Yeah. So I've been looking into that for oh my goodness, a few years now. And yeah, I found a lot of correlations, and so just still digging and working on maybe a book on it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if this was going to be a book. Yeah, please. Please, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I'm publishing on my Patreon about it right now, kind of willy-nilly as my attention comes and goes in the time of COVID. But you know, it's pretty cool stuff. I don't know where we would want to start digging into it.
Oh, that's a good point. So actually, I skipped this is my fault. I skipped a very important section. For our viewers at home that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey through Hema. To
Sure.
get to Hema, I should say.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I came to Hema through D&D, which is really the one right way to get there, I think.
I 100% agree.
Some people get there through sports, but I just think that's weird. Anyways, yeah, so I like D&D, I like fantasy, all of those things. I was living in Topeka, Kansas at the time, and this was like 97. And I found out that there was a local group that was putting together like a sword group to go fight at Renaissance festivals. So I did that for a while. It was kind of like professional wrestling with swords at a Ren fair. It wasn't exactly choreographed. It wasn't exactly not choreographed.
It sounds awesome.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, I spent 10 years doing that. I'm not going to throw shade. But then, after doing that a couple of years, I was like, I want to know how they really, really fought. And so I found Hema through the internet, and like Rob Lovett and Greg Mealy and Christian Tobler and Bob Sharon and all these guys, way back in the day, on internet forums, and just started studying it. Christian Tobler took me on as a distance student, and so he would send me things to train through AOL Instant Messenger, because it was a long time ago.
I love it.
And I would go train. I mean, there wasn't enough internet even for me to send him video of what I was doing. He just had to try to help me, and I would ask questions, and that's how I got going.
Awesome.
That is pretty awesome. The old was that old dial-up days, like.
Yeah, for me it was. I still had dial-up. I think
it might have been.
Yes, Sword Forum. I remember all the discussions on Sword Forum and myarmory.com and.
Were you, David? Were you ever around on NetSword, or was that before your time?
I think NetSword. That was because I got started in technically I got started in 2000, but I was 13 at the time.
Right.
And I was probably a couple of years before I was, so it was, I think by that time it was mostly migrated over to Sword Forum.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd have long threads of people just trying to explain what they were doing over text. Because like you said, there's no video, and it's not really the best medium for demonstrating how you're interpreting something. So, but it was a lot of fun.
I can't even imagine trying to do Meyer like that. Just shoot me.
Well, Meyer already takes,
Exactly.
half a page to explain one technique anyways, which is
Exactly.
both nice
So
and
if you're trying to
maddening.
explain the technique that Meyer took a paragraph to explain, and it's like 6 pages long. Oh no, thank you.
Yeah, it was a lot.
That's
But it was fun and it got me into it, and people were really generous with, like, I was absolutely somebody that thought they knew something when I was, new. As all new people do.
Right.
It's appropriate,
Yeah.
Um and people were generous and kind and helped me along my path, and so, now I'm trying to help other people.
yeah. So talk to us a little bit about your school, because you founded it yourself, right?
Yeah, right. So, um being a long distance student, I kind of was just put immediately into that position of having to instruct,
Mhm.
because I was doing it and I wanted people to fence. So they came and they were like, "Well, you had a weekend seminar once. Like, you show me what you know," right? So that's kind of how I got going, and then we started moving following my husband's career. So, um, I had a little school here in Kansas, and then we moved to DC, but we were too far away from VAF for me to go to VAF all the time.
Mm.
So I founded a little school there in my neighborhood, and then we moved to North Georgia, and I was too far from Keith Cotter Riley and the Frifectors, so I had to found my own little school there, and then now I'm back in Kansas. So, yeah, so I have my own space here, so that's exciting.
Nice.
Yep. And so I've got, well, before COVID, I had 20-ish people coming out and training, which isn't bad for a tiny little town in Kansas. And
Yeah, that's actually
we were
pretty
just
good.
getting going. Yeah.
That's more than VAF has
So-
right now. Sorry, David.
You mean none?
Sorry, David.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's a little cry emoji for everybody, but hopefully we'll get back to normal soon.
we will.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the what we're here to talk about. Let's talk about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about the kind of terminology that Lichtenauer uses and how that kind of relates to medieval hunting.
Yeah. Well, I first became interested in this question kind of around two things. One is the semi-famous image of the Birdman that's in Cal,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, man.
So I was like, okay, I know a little bit about Aesop's fables and what animals stand for in Western culture. And so, a falcon representing like perception and I don't know, keenness and all of those sorts of qualities made sense to me. Makes sense why a fencer would want that. The lion being brave and all that, makes sense. And then like feet of a hind, like feet of a female deer. What the hell is that about, right?
Yeah.
And like that question just really bothered me, because you could go, okay, yeah, as a fencer you need footwork, and that is true. But it seems a little devolved from like what the other animals represent.
Yeah, it's like the Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So that was something I was trying to find answers on, and having questions on, like what does a female deer mean in medieval German culture. And then also there's a little bit of verse that says, excuse my pronunciation, but proof the Gefert, right?
Mhm.
Like to prove the Tobler translated it as bind, as danger, as attack, as all of these different things, and he was like, I was just trying to gather a sense of that word. We're not really sure what that word is in German or in modern German, right? Because the spellings are too weird. It could be a lot of different words in modern German. And so he had just hedged his bets in his translation. And, every time that word comes up, he'd choose another English synonym that maybe would be it, right? And I was like, okay, that's fine. But that word that phrase gets repeated in the verse, and I was kind of analyzing the verse as far as which things get repeated, which phrases come up multiple times, because it's only 380 some lines. So I felt like repetition was important. So in the process of searching that, I came across a lexicon of German hunting terms, and in there, that word Gefährt, it clarifies that word is the trail that a prey animal has left behind it, or likewise the trail that the dogs are running on, right? The pursuing animals.
Gotcha.
And so all of a sudden that sounds a lot like a fencing line. And now we got something real here, right? And so that's what got me super excited. And then within that text, he also talks about female deer, and there being taboos about female deer and the path that they will lay down. They were considered an inferior animal for a noble person to hunt, right? Yeah, you would kill it to eat it, but it didn't show much bravery to track down a female deer and kill it. So they would be pursuing a stag, but they had all of these stories that the females would run back and forth behind the stag and ruin the trail to the stag, in effect hiding him through deception and trickery. And so now all of a sudden you have Cal talking about have feet like a hind so that you go to and fro. And now we're talking about deception. Now we're talking about feinting. Now we're talking about voiding. Now it means something on that elevated level to go with the other animals. And so then I was like, sold. I'm sold. Give it to me. What all else is in there? And so, I mean, we could do an exhaustive list of the connections, and there are a lot.
Well, I don't want you to give us all of them, but enough to discuss. That's for sure. Just only because that you should save some for the book.
Right. Well, I mean, the other two that are really easy that we understand through modern martial arts and modern fencing would be the guards and the Versetzen, right? The Lager and the Versetzen. And so Lager in hunting terms is like where an animal will go to lay down, right? So it's a rabbit's warren. It's where deer go lay down in the the pasture during the day. You know, they lay down in tall grass. It's their lair. It's Lager, sounds like lair.
Yeah.
And yeah,
the
so
English
that's what
word
it
comes
is.
from that. So
that's
right.
It's a cognate, yeah.
That's uniquely different from like a lot of the stuff about the Vierleger that I've been taught is basically that they're kind of like only meant to be transitory points. Like you're not supposed to camp out in ox or in flug or whatever, but an animal will stay in its lair because its lair is like a safe place.
Right. So, I mean, that does bring up questions of interpretation, but I think it's interesting that the verse says, hold only to the fore, right? So there's an implication that the Vierleger are different from all the other Lager because they are places you could take a rest.
Yeah, and
right?
Yeah, and it does seem, and maybe this is not Meyer, but it definitely comes up that the guards are something that not necessarily should be passed through, but it's actually a stopping point specifically to like wait and see what the opponent is going to do. Not like for a long period, right? But for sort of like this is as far as I go is Einhorn, right? I'm not going to go any higher. I'm going to stop an Einhorn, see what you're going to do, and then move out of it. So and that's very interesting because yeah, you're right. You're not supposed to camp in them, but I guess animals camp in them for a time and then leave. That's really interesting.
Well, but they also they all have specific tactical uses. So there is a time when you want to stay in that position for a specific reason. Yeah, you don't want to stay in there the entire time, right? But there's a lot of why you'd want to be in the left flug or right ox or left ox or whatever you're in.
It seems like a very interesting metaphor. I mean, well, it's not really a metaphor, I guess. More of a simile. Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, high school English. Why are you so bad to me?
That is not my expertise. That's for
all
sure.
we don't remember what they mean. All we remember is that they're not the same. And you're not supposed to mix them up.
And how dare you? Yeah, how dare you? There's going to be like 3 English majors that are just going to rail us in the YouTube comments, and that's okay. We deserve it. So
Oh, well.
so here's a question: why hunting terminology?
Well, I mean, listen, hunting is the other badass thing you do when you're a medieval dude,
Mm.
right? Also the other noble thing you do.
Mhm.
Let's be real clear about that too. It is classist as hell
yeah.
in the Middle Ages, right? So, really, what you had as a medieval man was fighting, whether in actual war or tournament or play or you know what I mean, all the kinds of fighting. You had hunting, you had dancing, and then you had ladies. Those were the activities that you spent your time and efforts upon,
Mhm.
and very specifically in public, right? So nobody cared, like if you privately killed an animal that was, and pulled off this badass feat. It was important that you did that in front of your boys. So, inherent in your question of why hunting is, why aren't you looking at dance? And I am, right?
Well, dance would be like the Tybalt book, right? You would have to basically, because everything in Tybalt is just Renaissance dance steps. Everything that he
Right.
tells you is just Renaissance dance steps. So there you go. That would be
Right.
Makes total sense.
Exactly. And I mean, when you look at like, oh, I have one of the earliest dance treatises, right?
Mhm.
It reads like a fencing treatise.
Yeah.
It has all the same crap
Mhm.
that like 3227A has
Mhm.
about practice being better than art. The dude goes off about practice being better than art. There's quite a few things actually that I was like, did this guy write 3227A as well? Because
Probably.
right.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, like I'm trying to look into all of the physical culture stuff that a medieval man in this case would be up to.
Mhm.
Though of course ladies got to do dancing and hunting, and they just didn't get to fight.
Yeah, I think it was more like ladies were required to do dancing. Men did it for fun, but ladies were more like required. From what I've been reading about this.
I don't know. I mean, Maximilian was pretty freaking clear that you had to go fight in the tournament, and then you had to show up at the dance, and you had to do well at the dance.
Oh, okay.
Because if you couldn't dance after you fought, you maybe weren't in good enough shape.
Yeah.
You should work on that.
Needs to be an
Ouch.
addition to the next Hema tournament.
Right?
Wait, I mean, this makes sense to why we always have galas after our Hema tournament events, right? Like,
It's
makes-
yeah.
oh, man, we're so with it, and we didn't even know it. All right, so on the topic of or continuing the topic, hunting specifically, it was something that you did. Was the language coded this way to kind of speak more clearly? Like, I want the nobleman to understand this, so I'm going to put it in these hunting terms? Or was it more like, we want to kind of keep the peasantry out of this and just make sure that we know the right way to do this? Or maybe a mixture. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know how much it would be about keeping peasants out. I think you do have to be careful because words are just words,
Mhm.
right? So like for all that I'm super into this, also it could be just words are words and it's all bullshit,
Yeah.
right? You can see shapes in clouds, but that being said, there is enough overlap. Now, what I think it really maybe more importantly points to is that things that we have jargonized as a fencing term, that this is a fencing term that means X, a Svarschau looks exactly like this because it's a technical term. To go Svarsch is just to go across a trail, right? So, you can, I guess you can read too much into it, but I guess what I'm trying to say more than that is that that that's just inherent in in the terms, right? Like if I were to pull from like, I don't know, I could say to you like man-on-man defense, and you'd be like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like it's basketball,
Mhm.
right? But it kind of means that helps give you clarity about what I'm talking about when I'm not talking about basketball, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So that's what I think he's doing, is he's using the other sporting terms to help you like get a sense of what he means with the action.
Gotcha.
Not that necessarily you have to imagine your opponent as a prey animal.
Mhm.
Though
Kind of
I don't know, maybe they did.
Kind of like just like a mnemonic device almost. Like if you're familiar with hunting, this will help you remember what you're supposed to be doing here because you've been hunting before.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. And I mean, certainly lots of medieval authors talk about hunting as training for war. That was something you did. It wasn't just for fun. It was also to like force young boys into killing animals
Right.
and seeing blood and risking death and all those horrible things you have to deal with if you're going to go be a soldier, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Certainly makes sense.
Off of that, if I can ask you, Jess, one of my fencing guys, I told him, that we were going to have you on and talk about this topic, and he mentioned to me that he once read a Mongol archery treatise, and it was talking about how the Mongols would use hunting as a way to practice group tactics for fighting. Like they would flush out birds as a unit, and then they'd have a different mounted unit that would shoot the birds, and then a different one to retrieve them, and then operated very much like a battlefield with commands and like banners and stuff like that. Is there evidence of that happening here as well?
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking that. So there's obviously different kinds of hunting. There's hunting just to get food, and then there's what we're talking about, which is the noble hunt, right? And so the noble hunt absolutely is a situation where it's a group activity. You're going to wake up early in the morning. You have a hunt master whose job is to know what all animals live in the hunting park that you're going to go hunt in. And he will have already picked out, this is the deer we're going to go kill tomorrow. And he will know where it sleeps, and he will know when it eats and when it rises and where it likes to go and all of that. And you would have group tactics even to the point that you would set up relay dogs up ahead. So you would plan out, all right, we're gonna versets the deer, right? And we're gonna knock rice in the deer and make the deer run, and we're going to make it run it specifically down this one pathway so that it will reach this cliff, and at this cliff it's going to turn and fight, and we're going to kill it there. And you're going to set up dogs and men and horses and the whole situation so that the entire thing goes down the way it's supposed to go down. And in fact, I mean, another correlation is that when the animal reaches the point, I mean, I keep saying deer, but like this could be any of the noble prey, right? Boars, they're pretty scary. Bears, right? All these animals they would do this with. But so when the animal reaches the end of its willingness to run, it'll have to turn and fight. And like that was part of what they looked for. And they called this the end of the hunt. But you'll notice when we get into the Vinden chapter, it's called the end of the verse, right? And it's kind of that same thing. Like the end doesn't mean the fight's over. The end means now we're really fighting. The chase is over. And so I think that's a useful correlation for our fencing,
That like blew my mind, because it's like there's so many good correlations to fencing and everything that you just said, and it's just like, oh man, why have I not heard about this before or read about this before? I feel like this is kind of revolutionary in how we think about fencing and how they thought about fencing.
When you used the term earlier, I mean, we talked about layer, and you just mentioned versets. When I first learned that versetzen meant to flush an animal out of its lair, that was the first time that using versetzen against the Vialega actually made sense to me.
Right.
Because everyone always translates that before that printed as like Perry, or no one really knew how to translate it correctly. Like it was just guesses. And then it was mind blown. All of a sudden that makes complete sense, because a person's hiding in this guard. So you use this strike to flush them out of the guard. And it was like,
Right.
oh my God.
And then you chase them,
Right.
and then you overrun them.
Yeah.
Right. And if dogs overrun the prey, you overrun them. Right. Like it happens down in order almost, kind of.
Yeah. And when you get to the end, that's the end game, right? Then the real exchange happens.
Right. Now we're in the Krieg.
Yeah.
Right. Because we're through all that bullshit of setting up how we're going to get to the end.
Yeah, exactly. It's really
now
brilliant.
we're standing toe to toe, and somebody wins and somebody loses. You know, and that was a part of their mentality, and their mentality very much like there were noble prey that were noble because it was just as likely to kill you as you were to kill it. That was the point. And to do this in front of your buds.
Yeah. With probably varying levels of intoxication.
Oh, sure.
Probably.
Well, so, this is they had boar swords and boar spears that were invented purely to make it harder for the animal to actually kill you, right?
Right.
Go ahead.
The dogs,
right? But there's still a danger.
Yeah,
that reminds me. I saw a picture. I don't know. Must have been 5 to 7 years ago, of a group. I want to say that they were somewhere in the Midwest, Missouri or Kansas or something like that, that had executed a boar hunt, like from the manuscript. Like they had the dogs and the spears and the crossbows, and they were in the garb and everything. And they had a picture of them with their felled boar, and it looked really, really, really cool. I wish for the life of me I could remember who it was, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's Richard Swinney.
Okay.
And he's in Springfield, Missouri, at least last I knew. And yeah, his group and his school, they were silverists as far as what they primarily studied. Silver and 133 were their focuses.
David's favorite.
What a mix.
What a mix. But but they got into the hawking. They had hawks. They did that part of it. They hunted feral hog, right?
Yeah.
Down in Florida. They've done a number of those hunts, and there's actually, if you go search, now that you know Richard Swinney is who you're going to look up, they wrote up an article about what does it teach you about group tactics and what does it teach you about warfare. So
that's cool.
Like that article exists. It's out on the internet, so I recommend it.
Cool.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna find that and put the link either in the description or on screen so that anyone who's watching can pull that up as well. That sounds really interesting.
Well, you mentioned hawks there, and that reminded me when we first had this conversation. I don't know how many. It was a long time ago, but I got super excited and I was like, "This is so cool!" So I got a dictionary of medieval German hunting terminology. And I remember I was like, all right, word search for, what terms can I, and just typing in a term. And I remember typing in vom Tag.
Yep.
And it basically says it's essentially the position with like falconry, if I'm not mistaken, where it's ready to like swoop down from above to attack or to catch the prey.
Yeah. Dach in that context is talking about this part of the hawk, right? Like, because they would talk about their feather coloration and their feather change in that area of the bird. And so Dach is the top of the hawk.
Got it.
Right? Huh. But yeah, but then you take like not even a big leap and you're like, yeah, but if there's probably a falcon, but if there's a falcon circling here and it's like, and of course, striken is the word for when a hawk strikes, right? Like it's all in the hawking stuff too, which gives us ties to like maybe the English longsword sources that have all animal references, right?
Yeah.
So this this could be a thing.
I mean, Fiore calls Vom Tag Posta di Falcone, which is, it's like, there's no leaps to be made. It tells you what it is.
Right.
That's great.
And so yeah, I mean, that's all inherent as well. And it could be, I mean, I've kept our conversation here focused on the ground fight because I understand that better. They easily could have been making all of these connections to birds of prey and associating sword strikes with the strikes of birds of prey, because they spent, like, if we think they spent a lot of money on armor, they spent a lot of money on hawks. Hawks were like Maseratis. Insane amounts of money on hawks. And it's just my own personal experience with that is less. Like, I can imagine a ground hunt pretty well, right? I'm pretty familiar with what that looks like. But yeah, but it's all the same language, I guess, is the point. The point, whether it is, whether it's a hawk striking or you shooting a crossbow, like, these are the same words.
So the next question that I would have is, so how do we, as modern day Hema practitioners, how do we interpret this to make it useful, not just historically useful, because it's very interesting historically, but how would, like, say, a tournament fighter use this in a more modern sense to try to get some sort of value out of it? Just curious.
Yeah, well, I think what it does is it helps clarify how some of these things maybe are intended to be interpreted or used, right? So you could think about Hängen and Winden maybe. And when we talk about Hängen and Winden, right? Like, why is like being in the hanger flug different from being in the guard flug, different from being in the winding flug? Like, why are those? What is different? And Hängen and Winden refer to dogs' leashes, right? So if you've wrapped your dog up, like their leash up on your arm, you are keeping them close to you, right?
Oh.
And when you let the dog hang, right? It's like letting a horse's reins go, right? We say let the horse have its head, right? Boom, that dog is off.
Wait, so you're saying so Winden is
wound?
Well, that makes
right?
sense because the windings are shortened.
Right. So that starts.
That's pretty cool.
That
That's so
starts.
cool.
That starts to let you go. Okay, well, you can wind extended. You can wind hung. But maybe.
But why?
But maybe why?
Yeah.
Maybe why? Maybe we can wind tight and then hang, and this is why he says to use the windings and the hangings at the right time and in the right order. And then once you understand that, then you can start to explore this is something I've been working on, the difference between a wind that thrusts, a wind that cuts, and a wind that slices all has to do with the timing of the hanging with the wind. So when you hang in your winding, you get those different results.
Yeah. Interesting. That's
right.
Yeah, that's really, that 100% answers my question. That's for sure.
Right.
It seems to be so useful that it's almost like, well, I don't want to say that we've been doing it wrong for many years.
We have not been doing it wrong. No.
But maybe, I don't know.
But the context really, really helps. Like what you were saying about the versets and using it as or interpreting it as a way to flush them out of the lager. And like what we were saying earlier about the lager being like a place to stay safe for a certain amount of time or until the opponent does something else.
Yeah. It's a place you can hide for a minute, right? That's why Kron isn't a lager. Kron is totally a guard, but you better not stay there.
Yeah.
Same with Ravenhood or Rankhood.
Yeah. Totally a guard, absolutely not a lager. You know?
All right. So I guess my next question would be, what kind of happened such that when we started renewing our collective interest in like Lichtenauer in general, how come this hasn't come up for how long? Is it purely just an issue with translation, or did we like miss something, or like how do you think that came about? Because it seems like I guess I lost my train of thought.
So, well, I mean, I could say that, this is something that's very much an amateur, especially in the beginning, right? Started very much as people just like, oh, this is really cool. I don't really speak German, so let me try to figure out what this says. And most of the time people were using more modern, dictionaries and things like that, and not having that understanding. Maybe they didn't have access to older dictionaries and things like that. So a lot of the earlier translations, especially, I mean, they were bad. They were really bad.
That makes sense.
Because they wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but
Right.
it's wrong because you're using a modern term that the medieval person would not have understood that word to mean. So I think, I'm jumping in here, but I would say that as we've progressed, we've definitely we continue to get a much better sense of what this all means.
Yeah, I guess I was just kind of curious as to how. Well, I'm always curious as to how we like lose knowledge, right? Because it was definitely an understanding that every gentleman in probably across Europe would have understood these terms as being hunting terms, and then just somehow we didn't latch on to that, which is just a very, I guess it's kind of odd to me, but I mean, you're right. We're amateurs. We're, not all of us do this as a full-time job. So yeah, I guess I could see that.
Well, and let's be clear, like the dictionary David referenced, the one I referenced,
Mhm.
that's the one.
Yeah.
Right? There is one secondary source.
Yikes.
Because y'all better believe I have, at least in English, right?
Oh yeah.
There is one.
If I know one thing from your work with textiles is you leave no stone unturned. So if there was another one, I'm sure you would have found it.
I mean, there may be, but I have not had much luck. And in fact, what I ended up having to do to really get an understanding of this, all of this is being discussed. Why we even know these terms is from German love poetry. Because they would personify the chick they were into as a stag and then hunt her. Right?
Oh no.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
That's equally interesting and terrible.
Right. It brings up a lot of questions.
Because you get to the end and she can't run anymore.
Right. Correct. And you better believe they use it in that term. It's kind of gross.
Yeah, that's ooh.
Because if you look at if you're looking at one of the books on poetry and you go in the back in the glossary, and when they have end, they say that means consummation. So there we are, friends.
I'm so sorry, but I have to say this. It makes total sense that they all used Milady now. I'm so sorry.
Wasn't invented then.
I was going to say this gives a whole new meaning to the post-fight Hema hug.
Oh, I like that one.
Everybody should go out for a cigarette afterwards now.
Yeah, I like it. Oh man.
But yeah, so I mean, right. So at this point, the way I've outlaid it to you at this point, after at least 3 years of researching the shit out of this stuff, now it sounds really believable and obvious and helpful, right? Which I'm excited about that it brought you to the question of, well, gee, this is so fucking obvious. Why didn't we come up with this before? But it actually isn't. Like, it's actually a really weird. It's a weird way to get there because you have to go through German love poetry.
Yeah.
And Yeah.
And that makes sense. And I can imagine. So when you first started going down this path, did you have a lot of pushback? Like, this is silly, or, other people saying that, maybe this is not because it seems so obvious now. You're right. And I shouldn't say that, because it probably did not seem always obvious to you. And there are probably plenty of people
No.
who probably put some roadblocks in your way. So, I mean, 3 years
Yeah.
is a long time to work on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can get too Freudian about this stuff, right? Like I said, like that is the worry,
Mhm.
that words are just words, and they just have a context, and that I'm overlaying too much meaning.
Mhm.
Um, and so if I've had pushback, I have, and that's basically been the pushback. But Jess, words are words.
Mm.
You're trying to make connections between things that maybe don't connect. Which I think is a perfectly fair argument, because who fucking knows? But what I have found for my fencing is it got my fencing. I will say my fencing, because at this point it shades all of my interpretations of everything. Like, my physical performance of things is different because my story about what this thing is or is supposed to be doing is different. Right?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that it would have to, right? Because once you gain that contextual knowledge, it'd probably be impossible for you to try to dismiss it. I just hope that I just hope that if we ever fence, that you don't look at me and think, "Oh, this deer is dead." I'm got you now.
I don't know about that.
But yeah, it definitely seems like one of those contextual things that once your mind is kind of expanded to it.
Right.
So does it just help in just your, because I know you do other stuff too. It's not just like, Blossfechten, you do armored fighting too as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I mean, I would imagine that there's probably some crossover there as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's now we're hunting different openings, right? And it's a lot. Oh God, how would you say it, David? It's that you have to work a hell of a lot harder to get an opening exposed.
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna say. You really, really have to versets them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to get somebody moving in a way, like they have to be actually worried about their eye slots enough for you to have access to any other openings. And so, right there, like we start to get context of like why Überlaufen is a thing, and why in later period stuff they're like, let's just hit the head, right? And it's because in armor, like, or at least to me, one of the pieces is because in armor, the only thing that's going to get a reaction out of somebody in armor is something coming for their eyes, because everything else you can kind of shrug off,
or you can't even see it.
or you can't see it.
Which
also, right?
kind of mind the first few times I fought, I was like, holy crap, anything below, like, and of course it's also the type of helmet I'm wearing, but like if a person's going low and we're close enough, I usually can't see that. You can feel it sometimes, but a lot of times you can't see it.
Yeah.
So when something goes for your face, you see that and you react to it.
Yeah.
You react to it, and you have to, because like as we know, we can easily concuss each other out in our helmets. Like it's not hard, So there's a certain amount of actual injury, and that would have been even more important for somebody that was fighting in earnest, right?
Yeah.
And then of course on horse, I'm doing horse now, and we see the like in Duarte, he talks about, here's how you hold the spear if you're gonna fight a man. Here's how you hold the spear if you're going to kill an animal. So on horse, you're going to hold them two different ways. You're going to encounter different ways. What are those, right? And so, I think there's a lot of crossover.
Cool. So we are at about an hour. So it is time for me to ask the ever important question. Will you publish your findings? Please.
Yeah.
Will you publish your findings, and when do you expect to be able to do that?
I'm working on that right now. and I don't know when it would go to press. It kind of depends on whether my publisher wants to publish it or if I'm going to self-publish it. That would change some things. So I can't set a timeline yet, but
No.
I'm writing as fast as I can.
I believe you. I believe
And you can always join my Patreon and get early previews of everything I'm doing.
Absolutely.
That's true. Actually, that's a great idea. Let's plug that, the Patreon and your blog page, because both I think are really cool. I've read a bunch of your blog posts that are for not for all of us, not specifically, because I think you publish other ones on your Patreon that are specifically for Patreon subscribers, right?
Yeah, that are locked down.
Yeah, I mean that's great though. So please tell us, your blog is ritterkunstblog.wordpress.com, which I'll put it in the description. But what's the link to your Patreon, just so we
it's patreon.com/Jess Finley.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm really easy to get.
That's fantastic. So if you want to see more of Jess, that's the perfect place, listeners, is to check out her Patreon and her blog. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode? Because this has been one of my favorites, I have to say. But
yay!
If there's anything else, I don't want to leave anything on the table.
Well, I wanted to kind of tie it all together in a way, and
Sure.
And say that throughout the episode, it's really made me think. I was thinking a few days ago, like it kind of hit me that real fights would not play out nearly as fast as tournament fights, as we see, like bam, 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 and now point back to your corners, judges go, whatever. I had a hunch. I was reading some of Udalev's treatise, and I had a hunch that maybe things would go much, much more slowly, especially, even in modern times, if we fence with blunts without any gear on, right? We're going to be way more careful and way more cautious. And everything that you've talked about, especially like in the context of the hunt, it makes it sound like it is meant to be a deliberate and thoughtful and possibly slow progression from beginning to end, instead of, okay, he's an ox, crump out, boom, done. Right? It's not supposed to be this just like quick, all right, here's the one remedy for what he's doing, and now we're done, now he's dead. It's supposed to be this like give and take, like almost like a turn-based thing. You do this, and then I respond with this, and then I do this, and you respond with this, and then before we know it, we're at the end or the windings, and now we have to fight.
Right. Yeah. I think so. I think there's a couple things. I think we do tend to feel empowered to go fast when we're geared up, right? For good or ill, but there it is. And I think we tend to fence way, 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 way too close.
Yeah, we have talked about that before.
Yeah. So in my space, I have a 16-foot circle, and if me and my partner are on opposite sides of that circle, circling, and we stay there, and this is how I train new people to understand space. But if we're on that circle and I turn and set my left foot, I can credibly threaten that person with a single cut, a single step at that point, right? Because a single turn and setting my foot, that gets me 3 foot in. My next step gets me another 4 or 5 foot in, and then my sword's 3 foot long, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I'm within that half L of the face. And once you start from 16 foot of cross and start coming at people, the bind happens way out here, and there's like a and so there's manipulation of the bind as it's coming, rather than a bind that is hitting more percussively because there's no, or there is, but there's less forward motion, right?
Because it's when you come to him in the pre-fencing.
Yeah.
That
does make sense.
Yeah. Right?
Because the fencing starts in the pre-fencing. It doesn't start like when the swords are crossed. It starts before that, when you're further away and you're posturing, you're moving, and he's in ox in a lager, and you threaten it with a krumpau, and now he has to move somewhere else. Even though maybe the krumpau isn't necessarily supposed to have to bind with the ox, they will realize that if that does bind, then they're chased out of their lager into somewhere else.
Yep. Yeah, so you can almost imagine, I know we have to wrap it up, but you can almost imagine that same hunt strategy I mentioned where you've got your ring, you've got your prey, you know what's going to go down, you have a plan. And so you could say, okay, they took ox, I'm going to hit them with a duplier. Okay, and I'm going to get there by throwing my crump. They're going to come out and bind that. I'm going to wind into the face. They're going to move that away, and there's my duplier. And that's what's going to happen, right? And so it invites us to start thinking more in terms of not they're an ox, I'm going to hit him with the crump, but they're an ox, I'm going to hit him with the duplier at the end of that play.
But the crump breaks it, and so of course, hence why that Rosetson is prescribed for that lager.
Yep. Yeah, because if they don't do anything, fine, fuck them, hit their hands.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
I love it. Oh man. So I don't want to leave. I really don't want to leave anything on the table. David, do you have any?
Yeah. No, I had one more thing to go back to terminology.
I thought
We were
I saw.
talking
I
about,
thought I saw.
Yeah, we were talking about like dictionaries, and when it comes to medieval languages, the sad fact is a lot of times there's nothing, and well, either we just don't know. There's a word that maybe it only occurs a few times and it's never really explained, and from context you're like, I think it might mean this, or you're not sure. Or there's another problem, is just that there's so much out there that hasn't been looked at. So there's a lot, and medieval studies are not particularly, they tend to look at the same stuff over and over again. I remember my medieval Latin professor saying that like probably 90% of Latin literature from the Middle Ages or Latin just text and things like that, have not been studied in depth. And I was like, holy cow. But one thing that's kind of made me think of is, for instance, when we look at Lichtenauer, who's teaching the Messer, but it's basically Lichtenauer's fencing, right, applied to the Messer, but he also changes the names for a lot of the actions. And for instance, he calls the what Lichtenauer calls the Schielhau, he calls the Swinger, and a Swinger is a trap for an animal, like a hunting trap, like if you catch an animal in a trap. And that's exactly what it does. It kind of traps them in a position. But to go back to like meaning of words, I was having a conversation with a native German speaker once, right? And so he calls the Krumpfau, he calls the Wecker, which means a waker, literally. And in modern German, of course, it means an alarm clock. It's something that wakes you up in the morning. Previously, it could have the meaning of like the bells in the morning or whatever, something to wake you up. But I was having this conversation, and she was like, oh, well, Wecker in Bavaria, it means to slap someone. And I was like, oh.
Wake up! Wake up!
But that's exactly how Lichtenauer uses the Krumpfau. He's constantly smacking the blade first, and then attacking. He always like pretty much crumps to the blade first and then attacks. Now, is that what he meant? I don't know, but I can now use that way of describing it to students to basically like you're slapping the blade, you're smacking it, right? And then you go. And so even if that's not what they exactly intended, it definitely helps in getting the point across to a new student and giving them a visual kind of way of understanding it that it just is so much more helpful in terms of retaining and really understanding, what am I supposed to do with this action?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it does make questions about like Versetzen easier. I don't struggle with explaining this anymore to students of, does it hit or does it not, right? Like at one point that felt laborious to wrap my head around, and now I'm like, yeah, either it does or it doesn't, and here's why. Either they run or they don't, up to them.
It seems like a great way to teach tactics, right? Like if you don't really understand tactics, well, there are these parts of a hunt and you can kind of imagine chasing an animal or whatever. Totally makes sense. So yeah, I think that's everything. I'm going to plug your stuff one more time because, well, that's what I like to do to leave off on. So it's ritterkunstblog.wordpress.com or Patreon /Jess Finley, right?
Yep. Yep.
Very cool. So please check her out at both of those places. Jess, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great chat, and I hope we could have you back on sometime.
Oh, I'd love to. We didn't get to talk about fabric for you, so.
Yeah.
I
Or wrestling.
know. One day or
Or
wrestling. That's true.
wrestling. Oh my
Or
God.
wrestling. Yeah. That's 2 different shows right there. 2 more shows.
Boom.
All right. Well, thanks again, and I guess we'll see everybody except for Jess next week.
Thank you very much, Jess.
Thank you
Jess.
guys.
Thanks. Bye.